Good morning, you guys. It is coffee time here at Roots Refuge Farm. We're doing chores a little late this morning because it's cold. What do you say, Maya?
It's not cold yet. It's about to be.
We're not cold yet. It's cold out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This morning is probably the coldest morning. I would say very likely
Most
the coldest morning that we will have this year here in the Midlands of South Carolina. And this video is actually a part of a collaboration. Today I want to talk to you guys about our tips for new homesteaders. Before I introduce everybody else that's in the collaboration, do you have a tip for new homesteaders? I know you're going to be in the zone out there when we get out there doing chores.
That's true. Just kind of based on like what we're about to go get into and the temperature outside, I would say where you choose to homestead would be of significant importance. I understand like family land or having roots somewhere kind of might decide that, but if it doesn't, then choosing a climate that you're okay with. Just going through this last week where it has been getting a little bit colder here, I've also been looking at the forecast of where we moved from, and it has been
Sub-zero.
Sub-zero, and I'm like, I really like my decision. So, congratulations on choosing the Midlands of South Carolina.
There we go. All right, well, we're going to drink our coffee, and in the meantime, I want to introduce you guys to the other folks that are taking part in this collaboration. My friend Amanda Palladini, you guys have met her before. She and I have been friends for multiple years. I met her the first year that my YouTube channel really started to grow out in California when I was visiting there. We've become good friends. She's since started a YouTube channel and moved to East Tennessee, so we're much closer to one another now geographically. And she reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested? I've got a group of friends here in East Tennessee that are doing a collaboration on tips for new homesteaders. So I asked them to do little clips introducing themselves to you guys. I'm going to play that, and we'll meet you guys out in the barn.
Hey, I'm Lee.
And I'm Lynn, and we're from Blue Belly Acres.
Just two retired military veterans trying to figure out this homesteading life.
Yep. So you got to join us today for our top tips on how to get started with your homestead.
Hey friends, my name's Amanda, and here at Bare Bones Living, I'm turning my dream 23 acres into my dream homestead, and I can't wait to share my tips with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Taylor, and this is the Smoky Mountain Homestead YouTube channel. We're a small hobby farm located in East Tennessee in a town called Andersonville. It's just outside of Knoxville. Learn with us, and hopefully you guys are enjoying the top 10 videos and our collaboration with... All right, thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm David, this is Amanda, and we are Welcome Grove Homestead.
We operate a 60-acre farm in East Tennessee with our 3 kids and a ton of animals.
Also, a ton of nerd knowledge that you bring in all of our videos.
Where I am your country nerd with a goat herd.
Saying
that you can grow where you're planted.
We are out in the barn. It is as cold as the weatherman promised that it would be. In fact, our tankless hot water heater out here froze over, so I just had to run back in the house and tote some big jugs of hot water out so that we could effectively clean the cows to milk them. The individuals that you just met through that little clip there, I will link all their channels below. I'll also put a link to the playlist with everybody else's tips for new homesteaders videos. You'll probably see some overlap. We're going to tell you some of the same things. We may tell you some things that seem a little contradicting, and I would encourage you guys to listen to the circumstances that lead people to give certain tips. For instance, we talk about the weather. We talk about not liking the cold. We deal with really, really hot temperatures in the summer, and it's not fun, but it's better for us than really cold weather. And so we say be very mindful of the climate where you go. We're so happy we're here living where it's mostly warm most of the year. This may be miserable to you. You may much rather handle ice and snow and freezing temperatures than handle 100+ degree temperatures in the summer. Listening to other people's tips and advice is great. It can really help you to make decisions, but you should always ask, why do you think that? Why do you tell me that? Why has that been what's best for you? They cut the turkey's feathers out here, and it looks like there was a turkey massacre. Thankfully, there was not. So one of my top tips for new homesteaders, whether they've really started work yet or they're just dreaming, is I encourage people to make an overall 5-year plan of their goals, their hopes, their dreams, especially if you already have the property where you're going to be working. Get an aerial shot of your property. You can go to Google Earth and put your address in and just take a screenshot of that aerial shot. I like to do this on like an iPad where I can draw over it and erase it and do it again. You could print it out and write on it with pencil. And this can be really hard to do if you're dealing with some restrictions and resources. It's hard to dream big when the reality of your restrictions is right in your face. But having an overall goal of where you would like to see your property go will help you in the long run to not have to work around old you. For instance, when we got our first piece of property, we had got some fruit trees given to us, and we didn't think about what we wanted down the road on that property. At that point, we were like, well, we can't afford to get goats, and we can't afford to get cows, and we can't afford to get much of anything, but we have these fruit trees, so here, we'll just stick them out in this yard and we'll plant them, which that later became where we kept our goats. And had we really thought it through, it would have been obvious that that was really the most viable place to keep goats. Of course, the fruit trees, they were toast after the goats were in there. Even with making measures trying to protect them, it really didn't work. And in that case, we lost a handful of fruit trees. It's not a huge loss, but it was still a loss, and it could have been avoided by a little forward thinking. So what you do is you just sit down and you dream really big. You think about, what would I do if I could literally do anything? And you get that plan lined out. And then you start fresh and you get a new map, you get the new property, you think of your goals, and you say, okay, now how do I build realistically? What's the next step in front of me that doesn't contradict the big dream? And you may have to go a whole lot slower, and you may not reach those goals in 5 years, but this is a turn your waiting room into a classroom mentality, that you say, this is the reality of where I am, but I'm not going to allow what I can do to contradict what I hope for. Hey sheep! Y'all, this ram is so mean. We knew he was when we got him. We knew that he was aggressive, and we had to tell our kids, like, do not go in with him, because when he's feeling testy, he'll headbutt the gates. I'm talking about you. He's looking at me. Yeah, I'm talking about you. It's just being very honest with yourself about what you'll actually use and what you actually need really helps a lot whenever you're planning a farm and when you put that plan into execution. For instance, whenever you plant a garden, if nobody in your house eats salads, you really don't need to plant an entire row of lettuce. If nobody eats tomatoes, you really don't need to plant an entire row of tomatoes. No matter how enticing somebody makes them look, you just don't need them. Just be realistic with yourself about what you'll actually use and what you actually need. If nobody drinks dairy, then just mark having a home dairy off of your plans. If your family are really heavy into eating meat, concentrate your efforts on raising animals rather than doing a really big garden. If you don't eat a lot of meat, put your emphasis onto gardening rather than raising animals. Yes, a homestead is an ecosystem, meaning that when you're raising cows, that milk and that manure really supports other parts of the farm. When you're raising chickens, they help fertilize the ground. So there are reasons to have certain elements, even if you don't directly use a lot of the product that they create. But it is definitely better if you build your infrastructure and your systems to support your needs, because you're just way more likely to stick with it, and it's going to serve you more that way rather than just sucking a lot of resources without really good return. Maya's in the milk room where it's warm while Freya finishes her grain.
Actually, need to check on her real quick.
She's such a slow eater.
She's actually fairly fast, but the reason you gotta make sure and check on her is because if she gets to the end of her grain and you haven't let her out, she'll leave you a present.
Oh, she poops?
Yes.
All right, I was talking about making a 5-year plan, setting realistic goals of what you actually need. Would you add anything to that as far as a tip for a new homesteader?
Just going over planning out your infrastructure stuff, water lines, fences, where things are going to be, even if you're not ready to actually do that yet. For example, like we ran all of our water line down the garden and gave connection points in valve boxes, so that way when we were ready to actually implement the irrigation system for the garden, I wouldn't have to come back in and dig up and lay water lines. So all we have to do is just hook up to those connection points and run irrigation to wherever it's going.
Yeah. We call it phases, whenever we plan, and this is why I love that master plan of like, what would I do if I could do anything? You can look at that and break it down into phases. And so for us, for instance, whenever we got our well dug and we got our well house dug and we ran the water to our house and we ran the water to the barn, we went ahead and ran the lines so that in phase 2 or 3 or whenever that phase comes along, we could do the irrigation. We still don't have irrigation. We're still watering our garden on this property 3 years in by hoses and sprinklers because we just haven't got to the phase yet where that is the highest priority. However, when we get there, we're not going to have to dig up the garden to do it because we were accounting for phase 2, even though we weren't in a position to actually do it yet. Maya mentioned fences in planning, and that would be another big tip for homesteaders. Your infrastructure will absolutely determine how nice of a time you have homesteading. It is really, really tempting to get a bunch of animals that you're not yet prepared for. I've done it, but if you can't afford yet to put up the fence to get, say, goats, I would consider waiting to get the goats, because if you don't put a fence up and your goats cause a lot of destruction or get themselves hurt or killed or get attacked by a dog that you could not protect them from or whatever, or make enemies with your neighbors, or there are so many different things that can happen when you have poor fences, then I would consider, is that really worth it? Is it really worth it to hastily hop into the animals before you have the infrastructure to take care of them? And I would say in most cases it's not. The other day I got on Facebook Marketplace and I saw somebody post in one of the farm groups I'm in, hey, we've decided to start a farm. If anybody has any animals they're getting rid of, let me know. Must be cheap. And I was like, oh boy, that really stinks for them. Cheap animals are a dime a dozen. Literally, like, you can find cheap animals. Cheap animals are not a good investment because most of the time, if what you are looking for is just a cheap animal, you're going to use zero discretion in getting into it, you're going to end up with problems and you probably don't have your infrastructure in place. And I have been there. I remember when we first started, all these people were willing to give us chickens and turkeys and donkeys, and people were constantly offering us animals. Even still, I get offered animals all the time. And usually they come with a long laundry list of problems. Usually they have some sort of history and some sort of issues. And usually we say, no, thank you. There are some exceptions. And if you know what you're looking for, you may be able to find a bargain animal and it not actually end up for a headache later on for you. My cow Hope, I got her for a relatively very good price compared to what other cows like her would cost, because I made a relationship with a local person who was emotionally invested in Hope and wanted to see her go to a good home, and therefore I got her for a good price. Some of my other cows cost twice as much as Hope, and they're equally as good a cow as her. So there are exceptions, but I would really point out those are the exception. With most things that it comes to the farm, I feel like making an investment on the best you can on the front end is going to save you in the long term. Like, the best tools you can, the best animals you can, the best infrastructure you can. And sometimes we gotta hobble by. Sometimes we've got to make do with what we have available to us. Sometimes we have to rig something together. We've done plenty of it, and we still do that to a certain degree in some applications. But if you are coming down to purchasing an animal, a tool, or putting in infrastructure, when you look at, okay, I could save $1 doing this, really consider, is it going to hold up in the long run? Because if you buy the cheaper tool that's half the price, but then you have to buy it again later on down the road because it didn't hold up. If you put up the fence with the cheaper material in the front end, but then 2 years from now you have to build it again, did you really even save money in the long run? Helen, my darling, are you waiting for your turn? Hey, beautifuls. Hey, cuties. Feels so good in here. Feels like springtime. I'll take it. I'll have to take my jacket off. So my next tip in homesteading has got to be this one. If you've been here very long, you've heard me say it. Learn to fail forward. Now, many of us started out homesteading after having zero experience in life around this kind of lifestyle. I know some of you have agricultural backgrounds, but as for me, I was a suburban raised millennial kid that had never really done any sort of farm work or anything like that at all whenever we took this up. And with that being the case, I would say it's really important to ease into learning things. View yourself as a student and understand that when you ease in to learning, your lessons will be less costly. You are learning to do something that you've never done before, whether it's in gardening and soil health, whether it is in taking care of animals and what they need in husbandry, each particular type of animal, whether it's building infrastructure, whether it's pushing yourself to work really hard, whether it's being steadfast that you still have to go outside when the pipes are frozen and the wind chill is 5 degrees. There's a lot about this lifestyle that is really just not our cultural norm, and you have to have grace for yourself and also be willing to push yourself really hard and really honestly assess the skill set you have, the determination you have, and how much you're willing to give it. If you're in it 100% and you're like, let's go, let's do this thing, maybe you could bite off a little bit more, but it's just really easy to get in over your head. And this is definitely one of those things that I am saying because I learned this lesson by making the mistake when we got into dairy goats. I had a couple of goats that I'd got when they were really small, raised them up. So I had some experience with goat husbandry, but we'd never kidded. I'd never milked. I did not have experience handling that, like a home dairy. And we were given an opportunity through a bartering agreement to get like a herd of goats. And we ended up getting several pregnant goats at the same time. And they all kidded in the same season, and most of them were first fresheners. And so I found myself never really having milked a goat, having an entire herd of goats that absolutely had to be milked and never had. And it was a nightmarish few months. Now, it was the school of hard knocks. I learned. I got a black eye from a goat. I was covered in bruises every day. I would milk those goats. My arms would be screaming. I'd be on my 7th goat hand milking because I didn't have a machine. I was not prepared. I would be sitting there just sobbing, milking the goats. But I had the grit and determination. I wasn't going to quit. So you can go that way. If that's how you like learning your lessons, if you like learning to swim by jumping off in the deep end and having a life or death situation, I won't tell you not to. You know yourself if that's what you need. I don't think that that's necessarily best. And since then, we have really tried to learn from how hard that was that we don't want to do it that way again. We have really tried whenever we are going into something new to ease into it a little bit more, to allow ourselves the opportunity to learn as we go without it being a sink or swim situation. The beautiful benefit of embracing the role as student in homesteading is that it allows you to really grow and prepare to steward more, even if you are facing restrictions. So for instance, like if your mindset is, I'm going to be a student, I am learning to homestead where I am with the resources I have. Okay, maybe you can't get a cow, but maybe you could find someone close by that you could buy raw milk from, and you could learn to process raw milk. You could learn to make cheese. You could learn to make yogurt. You could learn to do all the things with raw milk so that you have the skill set for when you are able to get the cow. It's a lot easier to learn to process raw milk when you're not also having to learn how to milk a cow and do that twice a day, and muck out the barn, and deal with the fencing, and deal with all the things that come with that. For a lot of people, what happens is they dive headlong, they get the cow, and then they're swimming in milk, and they're exhausted from learning how to take care of the cow, that they end up wasting a lot of what they get. A lot of people jump into making a really big garden when they've never canned before. And so then they're dealing with their first really big garden, kicking their butt in the middle of the summer, and they've got tons of produce piled up on their kitchen table with fruit flies all over it, and they're going to end up throwing it out to the pig or to the compost because they're so overwhelmed with the garden itself that they don't have time to learn how to can. Learn to can now before you get the big garden. Having the cow in the garden is ultimately not the end-all be-all of being a homesteader. It's having the cow in the garden and knowing what to do with what they produce. And you can actually learn that latter part while you're living in an apartment. And I would even say that's the better time to learn the latter part, is before you absolutely need to know it. Hey there, little cutie. It's so lovely and warm in here. It's gonna make going back out there that much worse. I am most definitely a frost tender flower, living in the right place. Okay, let's do it. The final thing I'll say about really embracing the role as a student in homesteading and in life in general is I can look at my journey as a homesteader that I've been doing this, you know, over the last 15-ish years. You could probably go back a little bit further if you consider me really turning my waiting room into a classroom and learning to source things well and find farmers that I could get produce from, learning to can, learning all of the skills, and then 10 years ago when we actually started to apply those on our own property. The number one lesson I've learned in all of this is patience. Yeah, I've learned to eat seasonally. Yeah, I've learned a ton of skills and things that before I didn't know how to do. I've gained lots of confidence in husbandry and gardening. All of those things are definitely things I've gained as a student in homesteading. But more than anything, I have gained this really strong sense that I can be patient for things, because I know that in the cyclical nature of this life, there's always the next season. It's gonna come back around. And the beauty of being able to say, maybe right now is not the time for that, maybe we'll do it later, it really allows you to hold those other standards. Like, for instance, we decided a handful of months ago that we were going to get back into goats. I'm looking on all the different pages and different boards where people are selling them, and I want them so bad. I feel terribly impatient because I wanted them now, you know. I mean, it was at the end of last summer, I was thinking, gosh, I want goats right now. But we didn't have the infrastructure ready. I wasn't finding the animals that were the right animals. And ultimately what ended up happening was I had an opportunity arise. A person that I knew did all the blood testing for this herd. I knew that I was going to get some really solid goats. I knew they were going to be an investment, so I needed to save some money for them. And I knew that we needed time to get the infrastructure in place, and so I decided, okay, we'll get goats after the winter. I found some goats that were going to be ready to be picked up after the winter. And it was a really hard decision to make, because the big part of me going, I want it now, was willing to compromise on all those other standards that I know that I should uphold. I know I will have a better experience with my goats if I exercise some patience. And I won't say that I do that easily anymore, but I will say that I have really learned to do that. And it has been truly being a student that knows what decisions are really more likely to fail and what decisions are really more likely to succeed. I've learned how to navigate it well. And patience is really always the key. This lifestyle will teach you patience. So if you're one of those people that goes, I'm just a really impatient person, I would implore you, as a tip for homesteading, go ahead and loosen your grip on that being part of who you think you are. You're going to have to become a patient person to thrive in this lifestyle. Because you cannot force gestation to take a faster time. You cannot force seeds to grow faster. You cannot change the season in which food comes in. You can't change the amount of time that a canner takes to work. You can't change any of these things. You can't change how long the winter is or how long the summer is. You're going to have to just learn to a certain degree to go with the flow and adjust and wait. Hey ducks, hey geese. So chatty. All right, let's go in. Uh-oh, birdie, did you make a bad decision? I'll have to keep an eye on that little guy and make sure he makes his way back out. Now, I could talk about this topic for a really long time. I think I could probably make a 3-hour video talking about tips for homesteaders. I'm going to keep it to this last one so you guys can have some time to go check out the other videos on the playlist. My last tip for homesteaders is that you have to have community. Community is everything. For a lot of people, whenever they dive off into homesteading or sustainability or wanting to grow their own food, they kind of become the pariah of their social circles, because frankly, a lot of people living in a mainstream way cannot fathom why you would want to do this. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say when we first started this up, you know, they sell that stuff at Walmart. And they don't, in fact, sell what we can grow at Walmart. And you can't go buy milk that came out of a cow that morning. You can't go buy eggs that were gathered from the chicken that morning. You can't go buy food that was grown completely 100% organically in very, very rich soil full of nutrients. It doesn't exist at the store. However, you can go buy something that looks like it. You can live in such a way that doesn't require really hard work. And so for a lot of people, they look at the homesteading lifestyle and they think, why in the world would you want to do that? But you're not alone. It feels very alone a lot of times when you first get started. And I can't tell you exactly how to find your people. I know a lot of people are making efforts to connect and create community. We're making efforts to connect and create community in our local community and are continuing planning efforts that are going to reach out in the future. Social media is a really great way to connect with other people, just like this collaboration I'm taking part in. I'm actually the odd one out in that I'm a few hours south from them. But the rest of the people here are homesteading in East Tennessee. They're all kind of local to each other. And when you are doing a homesteading life, a lot of it is you're working on your own stuff. You're managing your own stuff. It's busy. There's a huge time commitment. We have to be home every morning and every evening to milk our cows. So it does affect your social life, but it doesn't have to affect the roots of your community. Working together with other people, providing value for them and receiving value from them is such a huge thing. And this can happen at seed swaps. This can happen at meetups. This can happen by building relationships online. But having somebody there that you can FaceTime when you run through pressure canning for the first time that can talk you through it. Having somebody there that you can call when your new calf goes down with pneumonia and you have no idea what to do. Having somebody there whenever you experience your first great loss and you're sitting there on your barn floor and you just want to fall apart. Having somebody that understands what that feels like, it really, really matters. You know, a lot of times we talk about going back to the basics, back to the land, back to the old ways, gaining forgotten skills. And we look back to 100 years ago when this was just very much a normal way of life for a lot of people. During that time, people were 100% dependent on their communities. They worked together. They had relationship with their neighbor. And I think that mindset and leaning back into that, though it's not nearly as embraced in our modern culture, and it's a little uncomfortable. I mean, it's uncomfortable to make relationship with people. It's uncomfortable to be vulnerable. But pushing yourself to create community is everything whenever it comes to homesteading. Looks like my kales are all laid down a little bit this morning. They'll probably perk back up, but that cold was probably a little much for them even in the high tunnel. Well, y'all, those are my top tips for homesteaders. As I said, I could just talk on and on about this, but I will leave you with this final thought. It's worth it. When I imagine what my life could have been like had we never taken the very uncomfortable leap into a lifestyle that our friend groups and peers could not understand, when I think about the immense amount of blessing that this lifestyle has opened up to us, the relationships, the friendships, the richness, the way that it has changed our family dynamic and how we're raising our children, the health of our bodies, the health of our minds, the freedom that we feel because of the food that we have access to. It's absolutely incredible. And while we are now pretty far down the path and are living a pretty sustainable life and growing a whole lot of the food that we eat, I look back to when we first started and I felt like it was worth it then too. When it was kicking my butt, we were experiencing that steep learning curve, when we were overwhelmed, whenever we were taking on the cheap animals and didn't have good fences, I was still so exhilarated with the thrill that we were actually doing it. And down the line, if I could go back and tell that girl that was just getting started all of this advice, maybe she would have listened, maybe she wouldn't have. But either way, what I would say to her above all other things is just don't quit. It's worth it. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I will put a link to the other channels and their videos sharing their tips. I know we've got a group of people here that have multiple different backgrounds, a lot of which have made the dive into homesteading, moving out of cities and from other places. So there's going to be a lot of value there. Thank you all. I bless you. Until next time.